All right, moving on then to policy L. Ms. Pike.
Policy L. And for confirmation, this is the use of personal
The
wireless.
cell phone.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
Because I had clicked onto it and didn't want to move my screen.
Yeah, I know.
I appreciate the work that our central office and everyone has put into this. I know we have a lengthy discussion in policy review about this, which I also really appreciated. I also appreciate that version 2 was renamed restricted access during the school day. Just because I don't want to call this a ban. Like, no matter what we do in regards to wireless communication devices, I don't think we're moving in a way of like a total ban. And so I want people on both sides to understand that I think it's perfectly named restricted access. So, we are not completely getting rid of them. There will be opportunities for use in appropriate times and outside of, the regular school day. But then also on the other side, I think that covers both. There are a lot of parents that parents and guardians that want their students and to be able to have, a lifeline to them in case of an emergency or in case of logistical things. So I really appreciate version 2 of this. But I definitely also understand the purple version, which I think is version 3, which is the elementary and middle school restricted access, though I would be more in favor of version 2, which is just a complete restricted access. Thanks.
I agree. I'm also in favor of version 2 that restricts access during the entire school day, but students still have access to their device in case of an emergency and they can get in touch with parents. Who was next? Anne. Ms. Templeton.
Yes. I had a lot of conversations about this that were great. I spoke with all of the principals in my high schools and middle schools. In middle school, both principals said version 2. Version 2. And every principal said, just make it clear. Whatever you do, just make it clear. Let us be able to point to something. We need it clear. Both high school principals said we are raising adults and they have jobs and need to have access to their phones. They are managing their calendars. And both high school principals were in favor of a minimum of at least during lunch. Absolutely none during the school, school day. That is not what I was going to say.
Like instructional time.
During class time. So not instructional time for the sake of argument. Bell to bell, if you will, for the actual period. So it's gone when they're inside the classroom, but then in between classes they have access, and then gone but inside the classroom, and then between classes. So both of them were in favor of having access in class change and lunch. Also, simply because they are adults, so we need to be able to help them navigate their lives outside of school as well, because they're managing more. That was their feedback. So I would be in favor of actually the third option and with between classes added for high school.
Reverend Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions for clarification on the description of the three. Version 3, at the end of that, it says, and would limit high school access to before and after school and lunch periods. So the way it's reading, I'm thinking I understand, because when you say limit access, that means, in a sense, restrict access. But really what we're saying is limiting the restriction. Or is it allowing students to have access to their phones on campus before and after school and during lunch periods? Is that what it's saying? Yes? Okay. Because the way it reads it, I read it 3 times and read it 3 different ways.
Yeah.
I think that can be a little bit clearer. And that was my only issue.
Ms. Spike?
Thanks. Yeah, I guess bringing that up, I'm curious, and I did read through all them, but it's a lot of words and a lot of pages. So version 2, in version 2, the green version, restricted access all day for elementary, middle, high school, all of our schools. Our students still, they can have them on campus with them, and they can use it before school hours and after school hours. Like if school hours, like for middle school, would be 8:30 to 3:30. Previous to 8:30 in the morning and after 3:30, but still on campus, they would have use of their wireless communication device, or no?
Ms. Lautner?
So, Mr. Dupler, correct me if I'm wrong, but looking at the green version, yes, that interpretation is correct. Students would still have access outside of the, first bell and last bell of the day. I do want to add a caveat that, especially as we're thinking about athletics, that students who are involved in structured activities, either before or after school, those structured activities that are supervised by adults may still come with some restrictions from those adults, but this policy would kick in at the bell and after the bell. And I also want to go back just a moment to Reverend Butler. I think the language you were referring to, and you're not wrong, it probably could be a little bit clearer. I think it's on the cover sheet. But if you scroll down in version 3, if you look at the language under high school usage, I believe it might be a little bit clearer. So it would probably be worth taking a look at that to see if that's still language you'd feel comfortable with or not. But I can see what you're talking about on the cover sheet.
Yes, thank you. I did look at the detail, and I didn't have problems with the detail. But since, I read the front of the book first, I saw that, and then I'm thinking, okay, this does not, I'm going to use the word I was using, this does not jive with what I read down below. The other thing is, what I've just heard is that version 2, students have access to their phones before and after school in version 2. But then it says in version 3, that only the high school students have access before and after school. In version 3, as I'm reading it.
Like on the cover sheet.
On the cover sheet. But if that's the case, what I'm hearing is, reality is, version 3 is different between version 2 and version 3 is that high school have theirs during lunch period.
The way I read it is the only difference is high school has it during lunch, where all the other grades are restricted throughout 8:30 to 3:30.
That was my
Yeah.
next question, is to
Yeah.
clarify is that the only difference between version 2 and version 3?
That's how I read it. Is that correct, Ms. Lautner?
So we need to change the cover sheet. Once again, it's front page.
The front of the book is it's wrong. Yeah.
So something worth noting on the cover sheet is that it doesn't explicitly detail all of the red lines. It's just telling you the difference between kind of the blue and the green and the purple. So you're picking up some of those differences. But those red line changes also are going to add some context. You may want to look at those as well. So under the change in the law, the one thing that I will say is that the law stops short of time beyond the bell of the school day. And so in that opening section on all 3 policies where it describes the school day and it limits this policy to the school day, you'll see that that really kicks in with morning arrival and it ends with afternoon dismissal. And so you all are absolutely correct. You're reading it correctly in that that before and after school time, because that the law didn't go that far, the policy does not go that far in any of those circumstances. That added language, that added clarity under the high school usage in the purple section is really just a reinforcement, but you're right in that I think that's probably the only place that that added reinforcement is picked up.
So just to make sure that we all are clear, the difference between version 2 and version 3 is lunchtime is available for the high school.
For high school, yes. Yes, correct. Yes. And I want to clarify too, because my mind also just goes to cell phones, but we're also talking about smartwatches, any kind of wireless
glasses,
device.
too.
Glasses, which I did not know if that was
Yeah.
even a thing. I learned something new. Who knew that were smart glasses? So yes, we're talking about all wireless devices. Ms. Templeton.
Yeah, I have one more question, Ms. Lautner. I am honed in on 3. It's just where I am. And I would like to see in between classes, class change added to this, and we can discuss that as well, and I hope that we will. One other thing that the principals did request was the ability to, they want a clear policy, but there was a line in here, where did I see it? I moved in my, where it gets given back to the guardian or parent. I think that can be at the principal's discretion, whether it goes back to the parent guardian or the student themselves. Because that may be very difficult.
Is that in, I'm sorry, is that version 3?
That's, I'm looking at version 3. That may be across all 3. I'm honestly unsure.
What line is that?
I'm sorry.
Oh, Mr. Dupler
Oh,
can
here it
address
is,
that.
line 8 on page 3 of version 3.
Okay. I think, Mr. Dupler, you said you can address that.
Well, let me look at
Okay.
line 8.
On page 3, you said?
I was trying to make sure that principals can
No, I
do
mean,
what they need to do.
I mean, to your point, Ms. Templeton, I mean, I was going to bring this up. You know, as has already been discussed, the only real difference in 3 and 2 is lunchtime for high school. But since I've heard that principals want very clear, you know, parameters, taking out at the discretion of the principal, which is actually on line 48 of page 2 on version 3, would then give very clear direction that, again, high schoolers could have theirs during lunch, but that's the only change. If you put at the discretion of the principal, then you could have different schools with no lunch, right? No devices at lunch, as opposed to devices at lunch, which is inconsistent.
I think she's talking about, I see what you're talking about.
I'm actually
where it
talking
can
about
be
the returning
released.
of the device.
Like where I have a child that may break this, I'll be honest, 20 times. Like, and I'm going to have to come to the school 20 times and pick up my kid's phone. You're saying
I'm saying it's up to the
change it to
principal
release to the,
of
either
a high
the
school
student
student
after
at the end of the
school
day.
or, yeah.
At the end of the day, they can return to the student.
Yeah.
And not.
Right, so add student or legal guardian or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Do you see what she's saying? So on page 3, line 8, it says that a confiscated device will be returned to the legal guardian, which means like I'd have to walk into school 20 times and pick up my kid's phone versus at the end of the day, giving that phone back to the student. That make sense?
Yes. Yes. That's what it says. It says if it's been confiscated for whatever reason, then it would be returned to the parent or legal guardian. And you're saying you would rather have possibly the student as an option.
I just want the
Is that correct?
principal to be able to use their best judgment
Yeah.
on their campus.
That's a policy decision.
Ms. Lautner.
if I'm recalling, and you brought this up, Ms. Templeton, if I recall correctly, during policy review, and so thank you for lifting it back up. One of the conversations we had at policy review was that under this language, and it is worth noting because it's the same in all three policies, so no matter what the board decides, this language is the same across the board, so we are probably looking at across the board changes if the board wants to go in that direction. This language here, and Mr. Dupler, correct me if I'm wrong, does say that confiscation or inappropriate usage may result in confiscation. That requires that parent or guardian to pick up. Part of the conversation that we had at policy review is that while it may result in confiscation that requires the parent or guardian to pick up, it also may not. And so leaving that door open to principals there, that's just escalated discipline at that point, and notifying parents in a policy form that this might end in a call to you all to come pick up the device. But hopefully, that is something that's a little bit further down the line. Teacher hands it back at the end of class if they pick it up. Principal hands it back at the end of the school day. If we're changing the language, and I would look at Mr. Dupler to ask this question, we may want to change the language in such a way that it's clear that the principal would be the discretion as to whether or not to return to the student, or the parent would rely on the principal, because there may be a circumstance in which, depending on the inappropriate usage, the principal wants to withhold the device until the parent comes to pick up.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, Dr. Brown, did you want to chime in?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say, as a principal of 17 years, I've taken up thousands of cell phones, and this policy was in place, and it said that you may confiscate and require a parent to come. I think the spirit of that is that conversation is had with the parent. I don't know that I ever required a parent to come and get the cell phone, but quite often that would necessitate me having a conversation with them, and they would say, I understand, they shouldn't have done that. Do you care to just give them back to them at the end of the day? To which I replied, absolutely, and gave it back. So
That makes sense. Okay.
yeah, and I don't think we have any principal that, would talk to a parent and they say, hey, I don't have transportation, I can't get to school, or whatever the reason is, it wouldn't give the phone back. I think, the purpose of this is to not disturb instructional time and
that makes sense.
Not to cause a hardship on the parent's part.
Thank you for clarifying that. That makes sense. Ms. Bike?
Oh, thank you. So, I mean, that because I had a question about that as well, and I understand it. So, do we feel like that confiscation needs to be defined, or a different word needs to be used, or it's good how it is, that even though this is in here, principals can opt to have autonomy within what they do? Is that a legal question, I think?
Ms. Lautner? I think she.
If
or
there's
have
a
an
legal
for
answer,
you.
I would defer that to Mr.
Okay.
Dupler. I would say from a policy standpoint, I think a good way to look at policy is that policy is what is bounding the principal's autonomy. So anything that's not called out is where principal autonomy picks up.
Okay.
So it may be a slippery slope to start outlining all of the principal actions that are permissible. It is a lot easier to identify like where those authority lines lie. Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay, so next question is rolling back to that other one that is on version 3, page 2, lines 32 and 33, where it says, at the discretion of the principal, the devices may be used before and after school. So that looks like it says the principal can grant permission for it to be used before and after school. If the principal does nothing and says nothing, can the devices still be used before and after school? Or do they have to explicitly give permission?
Looks like something that would be in the student handbook.
As has been stated, the new law deals with the school day. So if you were silent on anything else, then a student could use it before and after school day.
Okay. Perhaps then this line could be reworded, because as I read it and as I think other people may read it, it looks like the principal has to
Say something.
say something for it to be available. And I don't want to get in a situation where a principal reads it that way and then something happens, there's a thing, and then it's like, no, the principal didn't have to give permission, you know? Is there some rewording of that?
We're talking through that right now.
Okay, cool. Well, while you guys are doing that, I have another question.
So I'll weigh in real quick to say that if the board has an appetite for going in this direction, I think, Dr. Butler, you were on to something in calling out the fact that it's duplicative language here that we do state before and after school. That's leftover language from the prior policy. So that language was in the previous policy. Now that you have those red lines at the top that do say, hey, we're not talking about before school and we're not talking about after school, I think that language would be very easy to drop here unless Mr. Dupler felt differently. What Dr. Wilson and I were just discussing is, what that sentence would read like if we were to drop that parameter, and it would just be at the discretion of the principal that students may use their devices during the lunch period. And we could go a step further to Mr. Dupler's point and potentially drop at the discretion of the principal if we wanted to remove that autonomy from the principal as well at the high school space.
If we're going to go with the purple version 3, I would like to give the principal the option of restricting the lunchtime access, because there could be a situation I could imagine where the principals would like the choice to do that, but don't necessarily have to do that. So I would like to see that change. Or if not that change, just removing that line at the discretion of the principal. The devices may be used before and after, because then nothing's said, the kids can use it before and after. My next question is, and I went through this, totally could have missed it, was there any language that addressed any sort of liability for now?
Liability for what?
Like when if these devices are confiscated, it would be the liability always falls on the family and the student of said devices. That these families know that they are sending potentially expensive devices to school, and that we are not going to reimburse for anything that could come up.
Mr. Dupler? Page 2, Ms. Pike. I'm looking at version 3, but it should be in
Okay.
all of them. It's the middle of page 2, starts with Knox County Schools is not liable, et cetera.
Where? Oh,
Middle
yep,
of page
totally
2.
missed it. Totally missed it.
Yep.
Line 18, okay. Knox County Schools not liable. Brownwood School campuses. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Mr. Butler?
I'd like to go back to Mr. Dupler's line item version, the purple version. I guess that's the second page, line 48. And that was made mention, was that line 48? Yeah. So if you take out at the discretion of the principal, we talked about that. One of the things that I remember that was an issue for principals that was lifted up by someone is that they wanted all the schools to be the same. That was one of the issues. And so if you put at the discretion of the principal, then they won't all be the same. And so, and once again, when I think about rewriting the policy, is to address what the law says or fix a need that we feel like was not been done by the current policy, and that was one of those issues. So with that said, I would suggest that we take out, if we want to go with the purple version, we take that out so that all of the schools would have the same requirement. Now, for those principals say, well, I want to have the discretion, then, but that's not what I think I heard from board members earlier, was that they all wanted it the same. They wanted to be as simple as it could be, and part of that was be the same.
Thank you. Ms. Morgan?
Thank you. This is such a big issue, I know, and there's a lot of strong feelings on both sides, and I think about the benefits that we could have if we did restrict access more. But as for my district, the thing that I have heard very strongly from our administrators and from any parents that I have heard from so far has been that our administrators have said they like the status quo. Obviously, there are changes that have to be made in line with state law, and we will be doing those in this version 1 policy, but our administrators have it down in a way that's working well. The way that it's done at Farragut High School is kind of like you talked about, Ms. Templeton. They can access it in between classes and can have access at lunch and before and after school, and it's working well. The way that it's done at the middle school is working well there too. And so they feel very strongly about that. Parents that I've heard from, constituents that I've heard from, want their children to have access to their phones at some point. And so that's been the overwhelming message I've heard out of my district. I totally understand that may not be the same across the county, but because that's what everybody in my area has been saying, I am leaning towards version 1 and doing a policy that's more in line with our status quo and obviously abiding by the changes that need to be made according to the law.
Mr. Triplett?
All right, so just to sum this up, what are we bringing to Thursday to?
That's a good procedural question.
I mean, if we're just bringing 1, 2, and 3, that's fine. When we make a motion, somebody says, I move to approve version 2, 3, whatever the version is. But if we're going to do more red lines, then, or are we going to just do that in discussion? Because there's been some changes suggested. So if we're in agreement with some of those changes, then we can go ahead and bring that so we have a clear policy to vote on. Otherwise, we're going to be just rehash the same discussion, and we're going to get, I think, nowhere. So do we have anything that everybody kind of agreed that wanted to change?
Well, Mr. Triplett, you can't take a vote tonight
Correct.
because this is a work session. But, I mean, I would say this. Any board member can say, hey, I like version 3, for instance, but when I bring the motion, I'm going to exclude this language or add this bit of language. And then once that motion's on the floor, then you all can discuss it and decide, are you going to vote that up or down?
Okay.
I mean, but at least at this point, you have these 3 distinct versions, and hopefully you all can narrow it down from there. I mean, if you do need to make some tweaks to one of them.
So what I'm hearing is we're going to have the same discussion.
Yeah, it sounds like
That's good.
Sorry.
Good to know. At least that.
Ms. Templeton?
To aid in that and maybe not having that happen. When we were talking about some of the changes on 3, we talked about the discretion of the principal piece. And I know that my principals would like to have, at least high school, would like to have the ability between classes. So I'll just ask, were there other changes that were requested of the 3rd?
I had the page 2, lines 32 and 33. I think that was of version 3 that I had kind of requested to be reworded. At the discretion of the principal, these devices may be before and after school, maybe used before and after school. That was my big request if we're going to go with the purple version.
You would prefer to not have that at discretion of the principal and just have it start with the devices may be used before and after school?
I would be okay with either removing that so that it's, because at the discretion of the principal is also down there on lines 48. So it seems a little redundant, but also confusing, or for it to just be reworded to say that something of the like that a principal could choose to restrict it at their discretion. But I'd be fine with just removing it.
Were there other thoughts for the third version?
That was it for version 3.
There were other thoughts for other versions.
Anyone else? All right. That was a good discussion. A lot to think on.